9th May 1941, North Atlantic, 300 miles west of Iceland. The freezing spray stung Lieutenant David Bombe's face as he stared at the crippled U-110 wallowing in the gray swells ahead. Behind him, HMS Bulldog's depth charges had torn through the water minutes earlier, forcing the German submarine to the surface in a fountain of white foam and oil. Now the U-boat's crew was abandoning ship, scrambling onto the slick deck in their life jackets, expecting machine gun fire that never came. Bombe knew what his captain wanted. Not prisoners, not vengeance, but something far more valuable. As his 9-man boarding party prepared to leap onto the enemy vessel, none of them understood they were about to capture the key to Hitler's most closely guarded secret. Inside that steel tube, sitting on a radio operator's desk in a pool of emergency lighting, was an Enigma machine with the current month settings still beside it. What happened in the next 20 minutes would change the course of the war, save hundreds of thousands of lives, and remain one of the most closely guarded secrets for 3 decades after victory. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from the Second World War. Could you have boarded that sinking U-boat, not knowing if demolition charges were about to explode beneath your feet? Where are you watching from today? The Unbreakable Code. The story of how Britain outsmarted Hitler begins not on the high seas, but in a quiet corner of Germany in the 1920s. Arthur Scherbius, a German engineer and inventor, created what he believed was the perfect encryption machine. The Enigma looked deceptively simple, a wooden box roughly the size of a typewriter, with a keyboard, a lampboard displaying letters, and 3 rotating wheels called rotors. But its complexity was staggering. Each time an operator pressed a key, electrical current flowed through the rotors, which turned with each keystroke, creating a constantly changing cipher. With 3 rotors selected from a set of 5, positioned in any order, combined with a plug board that could swap 10 pairs of letters, the machine generated over 159 million possible settings. By 1930, the German military had adopted Enigma as their primary encryption system, making crucial modifications that enhanced its security exponentially. German commanders believed they had achieved cryptographic invincibility. Every morning at 0600 hours, radio operators across the Wehrmacht, Kriegsmarine, and Luftwaffe received their daily key settings, which rotors to use, their starting positions, and plugboard connections. From that moment until midnight, thousands of messages flowed across German radio networks, coordinating panzer offensives, directing U-boat wolfpacks, and transmitting Luftwaffe bombing orders. To the Germans, these transmissions were utterly secure. To the Allies, they represented an intelligence goldmine, if only the code could be broken. Britain's Signals Intelligence Organization, the Government Code and Cipher School, recognized the threat Enigma posed years before the war began. In 1938, Admiral Sir Hugh Sinclair, head of MI6, personally purchased a Victorian Gothic mansion called Bletchley Park in Buckinghamshire, 50 miles north of London. The Treasury had refused funding, so Sinclair paid £6,000 from his own pocket, a decision that would prove to be one of the war's most consequential investments. The estate's 55 acres of grounds, its railway connections, and its proximity to both Oxford and Cambridge universities made it ideal for what was about to become Britain's most secret weapon. The first cryptanalysts arrived at Bletchley Park in August 1939, just weeks before Germany invaded Poland. They were an extraordinary collection of minds: championship chess players, crossword puzzle champions, mathematicians who saw patterns invisible to others, and linguists fluent in half a dozen languages. Among them was a shy, socially awkward 27-year-old Cambridge mathematician named Alan Turing,
whose theoretical work on machine computation would revolutionize not just code breaking, but the entire future of computing itself. But there was a critical problem. The Germans had recently upgraded Enigma's security, adding 2 more rotors to the selection pool and implementing new operating procedures. Previous Polish breakthroughs, achievements that had given the Allies their first glimpse inside Enigma's secrets, were suddenly obsolete. As Hitler's Wehrmacht carved through Poland in September 1939, then paused during the phony war winter, the codebreakers at Bletchley Park were essentially starting from zero, racing against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. What the British public never knew, what remained classified for decades, was that Britain's entire code-breaking effort stood on the shoulders of 3 brilliant Polish mathematicians. In July 1939, in a secret meeting in the Kabaty Woods near Warsaw, Polish cryptologists handed over everything they had learned about Enigma to stunned British and French intelligence officers. The gift included reconstructed Enigma machines, rotor wirings painstakingly reverse-engineered, and blueprints for a mechanical device called the Bombe cryptologica that could test thousands of rotor settings per hour. It was an act of extraordinary generosity and desperation. The Poles knew they couldn't defend both their homeland and their intellectual breakthrough. 5 weeks later, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and those 3 mathematicians fled into exile. At Bletchley Park, Alan Turing studied the Polish methods with intense focus, working 18-hour days fueled by strong tea and cigarettes. His insight was brilliant in its counterintuitiveness. Rather than trying to decrypt entire messages letter by letter, Turing realized that German operators made predictable mistakes. Weather reports always began with Wetter. Naval messages reporting nothing to report would say keine besondere Ereignisse, no special events. Most crucially, Enigma's mechanical design contained a fatal flaw. A letter could never encrypt to itself. If the cipher text showed Q in position 5, Turing knew with absolute certainty that the plain text was not Q in that position.
These predictable fragments, called cribs at Bletchley Park, could be used as wedges to crack open the daily keys. Turing designed a machine to exploit this weakness, honoring the Polish Bombe by calling it the Bombe, but building it on a far grander scale. The first Bombe, christened Victory, became operational in March 1940. It stood 8 feet tall, 7 feet wide, weighed over a ton, and contained 108 rotating drums, mimicking 12 Enigma machines working in parallel. When running, the Bombe made an unforgettable sound, a thunderous mechanical clicking that echoed across Bletchley Park like 1,000 typewriters hammering in unison, testing 20,000 settings per hour, rejecting mathematically impossible configurations at speeds no human could match. By August 1940, as the Luftwaffe launched its massive bombing campaign against Britain, Bletchley Park was reading some German Air Force Enigma traffic within hours of transmission. The intelligence, codenamed Ultra, revealed bomber formations, target selections, and raid timings. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding's Fighter Command used this information to position his outnumbered Spitfires and Hurricanes with devastating precision. RAF pilots never knew why their controllers seemed to possess uncanny foresight, directing them to intercept German formations at exactly the right altitude and location. The secret remained locked inside the mansion in Buckinghamshire. But while the Luftwaffe's codes were yielding, the German Navy's Enigma remained an impenetrable fortress, and in the Atlantic Ocean, that fortress was protecting a slaughter. By early 1941, Britain was on the edge of starvation. German U-boats, coordinating in wolfpacks directed by Admiral Karl Dönitz from his headquarters in occupied France, were sinking Allied merchant ships faster than British and American shipyards could replace them. The statistics were terrifying. In March 1941 alone, U-boats sent 243,000 tons of shipping to the bottom. In April, another 249,000 tons. Grain from Canada, fuel from America, weapons from the United States, all were drowning in the cold Atlantic waters, along with the men who transported them. The problem was naval Enigma. Unlike the three-rotor machines used by the German Army and Air Force, the Kriegsmarine employed a far more secure four-rotor variant with additional codebooks and procedures. Naval operators changed their keys 3 times daily instead of once. They used specialized quartz signal systems, allowing U-boat captains to transmit position reports, weather conditions, and attack results in seconds, giving British direction-finding stations no time to get a fix on their locations. Even with Turing's bombes running around the clock, breaking into naval Enigma seemed impossible without captured materials.
Winston Churchill later wrote, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." Every night, merchant convoys crossed the Atlantic in the darkness, their crews knowing that beneath the waves, wolfpacks hunted them with patient precision. When a U-boat's torpedo struck home, a merchant ship could sink in minutes. Men scrambled for lifeboats in chaos, sliding down tilted decks as the ship groaned and twisted. Those who reached the water faced the North Atlantic's killing cold. Hypothermia claimed lives within 20 minutes. Tankers were worse. They exploded in sheets of flame visible for 20 miles. Men diving into burning oil that clung to skin and clothing, burning even underwater. The merchant sailors who survived these attacks, who clung to wreckage or crowded into open lifeboats, faced days or weeks adrift. They watched shipmates die from exposure, injuries, and despair, their bodies wrapped in canvas and slipped overboard. Some convoys lost half their ships in a single night. The survivors reached British ports hollow-eyed and shaking, only to sign on for another voyage within weeks, because Britain desperately needed every ton of cargo they could transport. At Bletchley Park, the codebreakers felt the weight of every failure. Alan Turing took personal charge of the naval problem, relocating from his initial assignment to Hut 8, a wooden structure hastily built on the mansion's grounds. He assembled a team of brilliant minds, including Joan Clark, a Cambridge mathematician whose talent matched his own, though she was paid far less because civil service regulations didn't permit women to hold senior cryptanalyst roles officially. They attacked naval Enigma from every angle: mathematical cribs, frequency analysis, statistical methods. But without captured key materials, progress was agonizingly slow. What they needed was sitting inside German U-boats, locked in safes, guarded by men who would die rather than allow capture. The Royal Navy would have to take those secrets by force.
The capture that changed everything. Captain Joe Baker Cresswell stood on HMS Bulldog's bridge on the morning of May 9, 1941, scanning the gray Atlantic swells west of Iceland. His destroyer was escorting convoy OB-318 when the ASDIC operator reported a submarine contact. Bulldog and the corvette HMS Broadway converged on the position, their crews racing to action stations. At 12:48 hours, they began dropping depth charges in a precise pattern, each 300-pound canister tumbling into the water and detonating at calculated depths, sending massive concussive shock waves through the sea. Below, inside U-110, Kapitänleutnant Fritz Julius Lemp fought for his boat's survival.
The depth charges hammered the submarine's hull, shattering light bulbs, throwing men against bulkheads, and damaging the dive planes. Water began flooding the aft compartments. Lemp faced an impossible choice: stay submerged and die, or surface into almost certain gunfire. At 13:33 hours, he ordered auftauchen, surface. U-110 broke through the waves in a cascade of white water and oil, its crew pouring onto the deck, expecting to be machine-gunned where they stood. But Baker Creswell held fire. He wanted that submarine intact. As the German crew abandoned ship in confusion, he ordered Sub-Lieutenant David Bombe to take a boarding party and secure U-110 before it sank. Bombe and 8 sailors grabbed weapons and tools and clambered into a small boat. The U-boat wallowed dangerously, seawater pouring from its conning tower. Bombe expected booby traps, demolition charges, flooding valves opened to scuttle the vessel. Instead, as he descended through the conning tower hatch into the eerie silence of the submarine's interior, he found emergency lighting still functioning, equipment intact, and, incredibly, the radio room door standing open. There, on the radio operator's desk, illuminated by red emergency lights, sat an Enigma machine. Beside it were codebooks, key sheets for April and June 1941, the Kurzsignal Brevity Codebook, and detailed grid charts showing how U-boats reported their positions. Bombe and his team worked with frantic urgency, passing materials up through the conning tower as Bulldog came alongside. They recovered everything: the machine itself with its rotor settings still in place, spare rotors, key sheets, operation manuals, and charts. The boarding party even grabbed personal effects, anything that might contain intelligence value. Bulldog took U-110 under tow, attempting to bring the submarine to Iceland, but it sank the following morning, which was exactly what British intelligence needed. German Naval Command assumed all hands had perished and all materials lost. Donitz never suspected compromise. The Enigma machine, carefully packed in weighted bags in case Bulldog itself came under attack, reached Bletchley Park on May 13th, delivered by armed MI6 couriers under conditions of absolute secrecy. The impact was immediate and devastating. Within 10 days, Hut 8 cracked into naval Enigma. For the first time since the war began, British intelligence could read U-boat communications currently, sometimes within hours of transmission. The submarine tracking room at the Admiralty in London began receiving daily decrypt summaries showing exact U-boat positions, patrol areas, wolfpack formations, and refueling coordinates. Convoy routing officers could steer ships around danger zones. Escort groups could be directed to U-boat locations with precision. Between June and December 1941, Allied merchant ship losses in the North Atlantic dropped by 60%. Convoys that would have been slaughtered sailed through untouched. U-boat captains reported mysteriously empty oceans where convoys should have been. Donitz grew frustrated, suspecting radar, long-range patrol aircraft, anything except the truth. His secret communications were being read in near real time by mathematicians in rural England. One American sailor later recalled, "We knew something had changed. The attacks just stopped coming where we expected them. We figured it was luck or better tactics. Never imagined someone was reading the enemy's mail." At precisely midnight on February 1, 1942, the intelligence advantage vanished. Every U-boat in the Atlantic switched to Shark, a new 4-rotor Enigma variant that German cryptographers had been preparing for months. The 4th rotor, combined with new reflector settings, increased possible key combinations by a factor of 26. Overnight, 10 months of hard-won supremacy disappeared into darkness. At Bletchley Park, they called it the blackout. For the next 10 months, they were blind. The existing 3-rotor Bombe were useless against 4-rotor Enigma. New machines would take months to design and build. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic, U-boats roamed with near impunity. Dönitz had also achieved a counterintelligence breakthrough of his own. German naval intelligence had broken British naval cipher number 3, read in convoy routing orders almost as fast as Allied commanders sent them. The hunters now knew exactly where their prey would be. The slaughter that followed was unprecedented. In March 1942, U-boats sank 273,000 tons of Allied shipping. In June, 417,000 tons. In November 1942, losses reached 729,000 tons, the second worst month of the entire war. Merchant sailors died by the thousands, their bodies never recovered, their ships vanishing beneath the waves in minutes. The North Atlantic became a graveyard of steel and men, littered with floating wreckage, oil slicks, and desperate survivors clinging to life rafts in freezing water. At Bletchley Park, the pressure was suffocating. Joan Clark worked 18-hour shifts, her eyes burning from exhaustion, staring at columns of intercepted letters that refused to yield their secrets. Alan Turing drove himself to the edge of breakdown, surviving on cigarettes and 4 hours of sleep per night, attacking the four-rotor problem from every mathematical angle. New Bombes were being built, massive machines weighing over 3 tons each, capable of testing four-rotor configurations. But production was slow, resources were limited, and every day of delay meant more men drowning. The codebreakers couldn't tell their families what they did or why they came home exhausted and hollow-eyed. Most lived in billets in nearby villages, cycling to work in the pre-dawn darkness, past armed guards and barbed wire. They worked in wooden huts heated only by small coal stoves, the far corners bitterly cold even in summer. The work was classified most secret, a level above top secret. Husbands and wives both working at Bletchley Park could not discuss their jobs with each other. The psychological burden was crushing, knowing you could potentially save lives but hadn't yet found the key. Watching casualty reports climb while your mind spun uselessly through mathematical dead ends.
Some personnel broke under the strain. There were nervous breakdowns, hospitalizations for exhaustion, a handful of suicides. But most persisted, driven by duty and the terrible knowledge that their intellectual failures were measured in body counts. One cryptanalyst later wrote, "We knew the approximate tonnage sunk each week. We could calculate how many men that represented. The math was simple and horrifying." The break came from the Mediterranean, purchased with British lives. On October 30th, 1942, HMS Petard depth-charged U-559 east of Port Said. The German submarine was mortally wounded, settling toward the bottom with water flooding its compartments. Lieutenant Tony Fasson and able seaman Colin Grazier made an impossible decision. They dove into the sinking U-boat through its conning tower hatch. In complete darkness, in compartments filling with seawater, they located the radio room and began passing materials up to 16-year-old Tommy Brown waiting above. They recovered current key sheets and, critically, the weather short signal codebook used by all Atlantic U-boats. When U-559 made its final plunge, Fasson and Grazier were still inside. Both men drowned. Both received the George Cross posthumously. Neither ever knew what their sacrifice achieved. Those documents reached Bletchley Park on November 24, 1942. Hut 8's codebreakers, working with the new four-rotor Bombe finally coming online, cracked back into Shark within 2 weeks. On December 13th, after 10 months of darkness, naval Enigma decrypts began flowing again to the submarine tracking room. Convoy routing resumed with precision. By May 1943, Allied forces sank 41 U-boats in a single month. Dönitz withdrew his wolfpacks from the North Atlantic convoy routes.
The Battle of the Atlantic was won by sailors who fought blind and codebreakers who saw everything. The Secret Weapon and the Invisible Victory. By mid-1943, Bletchley Park had become a small city devoted entirely to intelligence. Over 9,000 people worked there, two-thirds of them women, operating in a sprawling complex of brick blocks, wooden huts, and hastily erected buildings. 200 Bombe machines ran continuously in purpose-built annexes, their collective thunder audible half a mile away, testing millions of Enigma settings per day. Women's Royal Naval Service, WRENs, operated the machines in 8-hour shifts, making minute adjustments to drum positions, recording results, and maintaining equipment that grew hot from continuous operation. The intelligence produced at Bletchley Park was codenamed Ultra, and it flowed to fewer than 30 Allied commanders authorized to receive it. Winston Churchill received daily Ultra summaries in locked boxes delivered by MI6 officers. General Eisenhower later stated that Ultra shortened the war by at least 2 years. Field Marshal Montgomery used Ultra intelligence to position his forces with perfect precision before the Battle of El Alamein in October 1942, knowing Rommel's exact dispositions, fuel shortages, and planned movements. Allied naval commanders read Dönnitz's orders to his U-boats before the U-boat captains themselves received them. But using Ultra without revealing its existence required extraordinary deception. If Germany ever suspected Enigma was compromised, they would change their entire system overnight, and the advantage would vanish forever. A rigid protocol governed Ultra's use. Intelligence could only be acted upon if a plausible alternative explanation existed. Before attacking a U-boat whose position came from Enigma decrypts, Allied aircraft would first conduct a visible reconnaissance patrol in the area, establishing cover for the precision strike that followed. When Ultra revealed Luftwaffe raid plans, additional radar stations would be credited with the early warning. The deception sometimes required sacrifice. In November 1940, Ultra decrypts revealed that Coventry would be the target of a massive Luftwaffe raid. Churchill faced an agonizing choice: evacuate the city and reveal Britain's intelligence source, or allow the raid to proceed. He chose the latter. On November 14th, 500 German bombers dropped 500 tons of explosives on Coventry, killing 568 civilians and destroying the medieval cathedral. Ultra remained secret. Similar calculations happened weekly. Lives that could be saved but weren't, because saving them would cost more lives tomorrow. The secrecy extended within Bletchley Park itself. Workers in different huts didn't know what their colleagues were doing. Bombe operators who ran the machines for hours didn't know what the machines calculated. Even senior cryptanalysts like Joan Clark, who became deputy head of Hut 8, were not told how their intelligence was used strategically. Gordon Welchman, who led the Army and Air Force code-breaking effort in Hut 6, later wrote, "I worked beside people for 4 years and never learned their real names or what they did." When victory came in May 1945, the silence deepened. Bletchley Park staff were reminded that the Official Secrets Act had no expiration date. They were forbidden to discuss their war work with anyone, spouses, children, historians, for the rest of their lives. Churchill ordered most Bombe machines destroyed. 8,000 technical documents were burned. The few surviving machines were stripped of classified components and sold as scrap metal. Thousands of codebreakers returned to civilian life, carrying secrets they could never share. School teachers who had broken Mayville codes returned to teaching arithmetic. Librarians who had operated Colossus, the world's first programmable electronic computer, built at Bletchley Park to crack even more complex German ciphers, returned to cataloging books.
They attended Victory Day celebrations, raised families, and never told their children what mother or father had actually done to win the war.
The veil began lifting slowly in 1974 when Group Captain F.W. Winterbotham published The Ultra Secret, the first public account of Bletchley Park's operations. The British government, recognizing that Enigma technology was obsolete and most participants were elderly or deceased, finally allowed veterans to speak. The response was overwhelming. Historians reassessed every major battle and realized that many brilliant intuitions by Allied commanders had come from decrypt envelopes stamped Ultra. The revelations transformed historical understanding. Scholars calculated that ultra-intelligence shortened the European war by 2 to 4 years, saving countless military and civilian lives and preventing further Holocaust atrocities. The Battle of the Atlantic, once attributed primarily to improved tactics and technology, was reframed as an intelligence war won by code-breakers and sailors in desperate partnership. D-Day's success was revealed as the culmination of intelligence and deception on unprecedented scale, with Bletchley Park reading Hitler's communications and confirming he'd fallen for Allied misdirection, suggesting the invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. But Bletchley Park's legacy extended beyond history. The machines built there, particularly Colossus, which used 1,500 vacuum tubes and processed 5,000 characters per second, were direct ancestors of modern computers. Alan Turing's theoretical work on machine computation and artificial intelligence laid foundations for the digital revolution. The organizational methods developed at Bletchley Park, compartmentalized teamwork, interdisciplinary collaboration, systematic problem-solving at industrial scale, became templates for post-war intelligence agencies and research institutions worldwide. The personnel trained there became pioneers in emerging fields. Max Newman, who oversaw Colossus development, founded the Computing Machine Laboratory at Manchester University, where the world's first stored program computer ran in 1948. The institutional knowledge flowed into GCHQ, Britain's Signals Intelligence Agency, and America's National Security Agency, shaping Cold War cryptography for decades. Perhaps most importantly, Bletchley Park demonstrated what could be achieved when intellect was valued as highly as courage, when unconventional thinkers were given resources and trust, and when women were allowed to contribute fully. The Victorian mansion where chess champions and crossword enthusiasts cracked the Nazi war machine became proof that wars could be won not just by those who fought bravest, but by those who thought deepest. Today, Bletchley Park is a museum. The mansion has been restored, the huts preserved, and working bomb replicas built from original blueprints. Visitors can stand where Joan Clark worked those 18-hour shifts, where Turing paced while developing the logic of mechanical thought, where thousands of young women operated machines they didn't fully understand in service of victory they couldn't publicly claim. The statistics are preserved in glass cases. 3,000 messages broken daily at peak. 211 bombs built. 2 to 4 years shaved from the war. Hundreds of thousands of lives saved. On that freezing May morning in 1941, when Lieutenant David Bombe stepped aboard U-110, not knowing if demolition charges would explode beneath his feet, he was performing an act of courage as significant as any infantry assault. The Enigma machine and codebooks he seized that day unlocked secrets that would help Britain survive its darkest hour, save convoys from slaughter, and turn the tide in a battle being fought across 3,000 miles of ocean. But the real victory at Bletchley Park wasn't captured in a single boarding action.
It was won through 4 years of exhausting mental combat by thousands of men and women who fought an invisible war against an enemy they never saw. They worked until their eyes burned, staring at meaningless letters until patterns emerged from chaos. They carried the weight of knowing their failures were measured in ships sunk and lives lost. They sacrificed credit, recognition, and the ability to ever fully explain what they'd done, even to their own families. Alan Turing, who designed the machines that broke Enigma, died in 1954, persecuted by the very government he'd helped save, his achievements still classified and unknown. Joan Clark, whose mathematical genius matched anyone at Bletchley Park, lived quietly until 1996, her contributions finally recognized only near the end of her life. Thousands of others, the bombe operators, the interception station radio operators, the translators and analysts, remained silent for decades, honoring oaths made in wartime, taking their stories to the grave. Hitler believed Enigma was unbreakable. He staked Germany's military communications, the entire nervous system of his war machine, on that belief. He was wrong. A collection of mathematicians, linguists, engineers, and sailors proved that genius and courage could defeat what seemed like mathematical certainty. They outsmarted Hitler not with larger armies or more powerful weapons, but with minds that saw patterns where others saw only random chaos, with determination that wouldn't accept failure, and with sacrifices both visible and invisible. The Atlantic Ocean still holds the wrecks of those merchant ships sunk during the blackout months of 1942, when Enigma went dark and the codebreakers fought desperately to restore the light. Inside those rusted hulls lie the bones of merchant sailors who never knew that their deaths drove mathematicians to work harder, think deeper, and ultimately crack codes that would save thousands of their comrades still at sea. But across the English Channel, another secret battle was being fought in the shadows, a deadly game of espionage, double agents, and deception that would determine the fate of D-Day itself. Join us next time as we uncover Operation Fortitude, how Britain convinced Hitler the invasion would land anywhere except Normandy, and how double agents turned the entire German intelligence network against itself in the greatest deception operation in military history.